All right, are there any questions before we go and do our demo today? Okay, so you want to fire up your WebStorm. And I'm going to create a new folder in here for Unit 7. Just like before, create your CSS and your JS folder. And the index file. If you've done it already, that's great. Just wait for me. CSS, JS, and we'll create our index file. Okay, so link to your CSS and JS file. I'm just going to call them both main. Okay. And the CSS, if you want to copy the one from Blackboard, I showed you earlier, so we don't have to spend extra time going over this. So I kind of already set this up already, so copy that from the review and I paste it in here. Okay, so all I'm doing is just I put a background for the focus on the input tag and hover the button with a blue color, and then I have a field set, so kind of a border around the field set and so on. Okay, so save that, go ahead and then link that into your HTML file. Also your script. Okay. And here we're going to build just the simple H1. Just say anything you want. Okay, for that. And so what I'm going to do is going to have an input box, and then we're going to have maybe like insert some data. We can either use paths like what we have, or we can use something like for a user account, right? Let me use your account this time. I have a first name, last name, and just like password and a username, bless you. And then we store those data into an object. Okay, so I mean, you have other options as well. Of course, you can use an array to store those data. That's fine too. But in this example, let's just say we use object to do that. So every time we add a new person to the list, we have to instantiate a new object and store that inside that. So we have like a. So we'll keep an array of objects. Okay. So let's do here a field set. Okay. So inside a field set, we have the input for the first name, or maybe just put like name, just three: name, username, password. How's that? So we'll give ID of name. Okay, and then we have input ID of username. Yeah, I'm not going to validate this, so we'll just assume that everything's going to be perfectly input. And a password. If you want to put the type will be password, right? That will give you that dot 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 instead of the actual characters. If you set a type to password, that's what you'll see. And then we have a button here to submit the data. We have I'm going to set the ID to just maybe submit. Just say submit. This is not a form, by the way, so we're not doing a form. So we're going to just process the data, call a function, and then read the data from the input fields, and then add that to the object. Okay. If you do a form, then usually you send that form to a processor, like a backend file to process the data. So we're not going to do that. So we're just going to simply do a something on the front end. So I have another and then we also want to be able to display the data back. So let's have another field set down here for the output. Okay, and I'll put the put here a. So this field set between this and this one here. Why don't we put a button here as well? This is just a show the data. We'll put an ID here, so we know to target the button. So we show it. We're going to show those three data back to the user. I mean, when you display, you have a lot of options. You can use a drop-down box or combo box, or display back into the input, and then you can even let them, edit or disallow the edit and so on, right? So we just put that into a div tag, and the div tag has an ID. We'll call it output or target, however you want to call it. And here we'll maybe use like 3 inputs or just the input or anything, or paragraph tag, doesn't matter. Okay. Okay, so let's save this and run it and see what it looks like. Hopefully it's not too weird. Kind of, but oh well. We should probably use a legend as well, and we can fix that. So maybe also some placeholders in here. Notice again when I put my mouse over it, it's yellow, right? So that's the input input focus. So that's a really cool feature if you want to use that in your code. Let's just go in here and add a legend just to make it nice. And the legend would say user info. Go down here, we have output. That's fine. You can call it whatever you want, it's fine. It's just basically this legend here makes it look kind of neat. So we enter the name, username, password, submit. Okay, process the data, stores it into an object, and then we clear the fields, and then enter another person's name, and then keep adding that to the project, to the object. And then when we say show data, it's going to output the data from the object out to this output box down here. Okay, very simple like that. So in the CSS, I have yeah, that's okay. But you can play with it if you want, that's fine. So we're going to put a BR in here, make some room. I could use like margin, but for now that's good enough. Okay, there's some space in here. All right, so I think the view is done. I'm going to read the input from the name, username, password. But I need to also set up 2 buttons, so 2 event listeners for the submit button and the show data button. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. And so it'll be the main script. So we need to target their buttons, right? So buttons, we always want to make sure that we do the unload because we want to access them right away. Okay, let me close this over here. So this is going to be function, And then we have two buttons. The first one is the submit button. So you can say btn submit if you want. Since I have two, I want to make sure I know which one I'm looking for. The document that you have all those, you have like 6 options to get it, right? So I could use just the query selector or element by ID. Either one is fine. This will be the submit. I think that's what it's called. And then you can go right ahead and then add the event listener. So click. When we submit this data, we're going to go and process the data. So I could call a function called process data. I'm just storing it to the object. So that's the first button. The second button is show data. So query selector. Okay, and you can just copy it and paste these two here. Just change the data, the variable name. It's fine too, but it's always good to practice typing. So add event listener. Same thing here. Instead of process, I'm going to show data. So I'm going to call a function called show data, and then now that's ready. Okay, so every time when I process the data, I need to store that into an object. Okay, so that object needs to be either, if it's inside the unload here, it needs to pass over to the process data or show data here. Or in this case, we just make it global in the global space. It's always available anywhere, right? So we could have it maybe up here or down here somewhere in the global space here. So we could have an object to store the data. So it's users. So I could say function users. I use a capital U because I want to make that as a constructor. Okay, you don't have to use it, but since you have arrays and new array, new object, and so on, it's just follow the convention. If it's a constructor, make it a capital letter. If it's just regular function, use lowercase. Okay, so just by convention. No, this. Okay, so I have the. I'll go ahead and get my properties. I have 3 of them. The first is just name. If you call it name, and then this name. Sorry, it's a constructor. You have to use the keyword this, whereas a regular object just use the variable name. Is equal to name. Okay, so what that means is I have to pass in some parameters to this constructor. So I have the name, username, and then password. So I take 3 parameters. You do the same with the other one. So this username is equal to the username passed to it. And then this password is the password. Let's type the username here. Okay, notice that the name is kind of purplish color. Usually anything in that color is reserved. So sometimes you might have a little weird results if you use the keyword name in here. So sometimes it's not a good idea to use the variable name. You'll see if this works or not. But I've had students in the past actually run into an issue where if you put this name, you get a really strange result. Okay, because the name is actually it's also a reserved word to get the name of a property function. So, but I think for now we'll see what happens. Okay, so I got that, and then I also want, this is just a constructor, right? So this is the constructor. To use it, you have to instantiate an object to use that. So I can say var users, and this is going to be array. So I put either new array, that's you. Okay, the reason I said array is because inside here I have an array of these objects. Okay, so the first one will be like, for example, if you do this, first person, second person, third person, like that. Okay, and inside here will be, you have the name, username, and password, name, username, password, each of those. So the index of 0 give you this object, and so forth. So it will look like that. Okay, if you don't use array, if you just say new users, if you do that, the all again is just one user. Okay, and I want to be able to store many users. So I just use one variable. To do that, you have to use the array to get that for you. And then I also want to make sure that I can index each of those users. So every time I want to add something to the list, I want to be able to track the user count. I mean, there are lots of ways. One way is you can just say, oh, I want to have an index that started from 0. Okay. And then we'll just increment the index every time we add one. This is again just one way. Lots of ways. So these are global. Okay. I mean, it can be accessed anywhere, which is what I want. Okay, now so back to our function here. We have two functions: the process data and show data. So let's do the process data first. So right down here, say function process data. So now basically we're just reading data from the input. So if you look at your code, you have ID name, ID username, ID password. Just those three. So you can get variable names. Var name is document dot. You can get element by ID. Okay. Its name. The other one is username. Same thing. Username. Just make sure we have used the username and get element by ID and the query selector here. Just add the ID. You have to use the pound sign because this is a CSS rule. Okay, and this is not. Okay, so just be careful. You might not get what you want. And then I have a password. I'll just type something here. Get element by ID. And then this password. Okay, so I got those. And then now I want to store those into the array here. So every time I want to add a new person, I need to instantiate a new user. So here I just probably maybe change that to maybe user. I guess it makes more sense that way. Okay. So here I want to say the users array of index 0, in this case would be index, whatever the current index is. So the 0th person, I need to instantiate a new user. Okay, that's what I'm doing. And this user, the object we created, has 3 parameters. We just pass those in, right? So pass name, username, password. So Is that correct?
Whoever wants to go next.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, who else?
Why are you bleeding?
Okay.
Can't see if that right one is working.
Okay, so actually you want to be careful here because this name, these are actually just pointing to the tag, right? If I just save this way, I'm just storing the tag information here, not the actual value input inside the input box. So you want to say name.value, okay? And then same thing with this. And the reason why I use this here, instead of, you could do from here dot value, and you will get the actual value, right? But I want to be able to clear the input boxes after I'm done with the installation, recording here. So I just want to target that, and then once I'm done with that one, I could now say a name dot value is now blank. Okay. I think you might be able to do something like username dot value, password dot value. I think that might be even legal in JavaScript. So just, we'll see. Instead of doing one, just do all three together and you get blank. And then once we have stored that person into the first element has an object called user, then we need to increment the index to the next user. Okay. So now it's 1. So we could just test it now and see if it works before we move forward.
You want to show the data though.
We show what?
You want to show the data because
No.
we're only processing it right now. Right?
No, right, you're right. No, it doesn't show yet, but we can still check it in the using the web tool. Okay, so save it and go ahead and refresh your page over here. Okay, I can't tell if there's errors or not, so you always want to turn on your web developer tool. And as you can see, I have an error already on mine. It should show data is not defined. So I probably mistyped it or something. I probably have a capital D here. Oh, because we have the function is not defined yet. So this show data is not defined. So why don't we go ahead and just create that down here. You can make it just blank. Function show data. And just leave that as is. So we don't have the error. Save that. And then go back here and refresh. Okay, so all looks good. So now, if you type in, because you know the user is and index are both global variables, that means you can access those right away. If you type in users, you'll see that it's blank. Okay, there's no data there. Has linked to 0. Index is should be just 0. Okay, so that's fine. So if we add the information here, I should have put some placeholder in here. Just say Joe Black. JBLAK and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so if I submit, no errors. So far so good. So now let's check the index and also check the array, the users. So we have something in there. Okay, we have a user because that's the class, the function that we created, or the constructor. Otherwise, it would say object if you have an object type. And we've checked the index. You'll see that it should now be 1. So something going on. And if you expand that user, the arrow, you'll see what the data looks like. So here we have 1 user, and the index is 0. You keep going, you'll see that we have name is Joe Black, password and username in there. So far, so good. And as you can see, my list is clear, right? It's not there. So this feature is really nice in JavaScript. Save you a lot of code. Just point everything to one variable, and then the rest can have the same variable name. Okay. So if you don't refresh your screen, because we're not writing to a cookie or a local storage, we could. If you write to a local storage, then it doesn't matter if you refresh or not. The data will still be there. We can retrieve it. But now it's just in RAM. So just make sure you don't refresh the screen. If you do, the data will be all wiped out. So I can go and add another person here. Just anything. Okay. And then if I go ahead and show my users, I have 2 of them. So you can see there are 2 of them. And then I have the second end user here. So it's quite nice. And I think if you go like console log, if you do console log, no, console table, maybe that might, I put the users in here. See what that does. Yeah, so it gives you that nice table instead of just the arrow we saw earlier. You give you an index, the actual data in that object. But the next thing is we're going to read the data from the object and then output it to that output box. Okay, so just for now, you can see that we have, so how do you access the name in here? How do you get Joe Black out of this? So let's do this again, put up here. Okay, how do you read Joe Black? If you look at this, remember that your users is an array. So array of the first index, and then dot name, dot username, dot password. Okay, very easy like that. So it's be users of 0 dot name gives me Joe. Okay, users dot 1 give me Clark. That's how you access those data. The first element, the second person, third person, and fourth person, and so on. You can also set those names. Like you could say user 1 dot name is now Lois Lane. Okay. So if I go back and show the table, you'll see that it's now Lois Lane. Okay. You can read data and write data out to your objects. So what if you want to delete that name entirely, right? So you could so show that again. If you want to remove that name, see we can. We're going to say users of the 0, the first person dot name. If you want to delete that, remember is object dot property. So I could say delete the name property from user 1. This is true, that means it's successful. So if I go back and show the table, it's still there. No, it's not there anymore. As you can see, it deletes it from the object itself. So name, as you can see down here, it's not in order, but for some reason, the name data has been deleted. So if I type users of 0 dot name, you get undefined because it's no longer there. Okay, whereas user 2 should still be there. I'm user 1 for Lois Lane. Okay, so that's how you delete data, delete property from there. If I just say user name is equal to blank, it doesn't really delete that from the list. Okay, it will still be there. It's just that it's an empty string. Okay. Okay, any questions before we take a break? No? Okay, so why don't we take a break, a 10-minute break, we'll come back, and then we'll work the other way around. All right?
Put your coat up.
No. Yeah, let's see.